we are going to talk about subscriber acquisition and also churn, because you can't talk about acquisition without churn, or you shouldn't, put it that way. We're going to run through some stuff which is based around the premise, which is actually not just a premise, it's actually a fact, and some of you will already know this from your own data, that acquisition campaigns do actually drive churn. The more successful your acquisition campaign, the more likely you are to see more churn subsequently. We're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about how you can address that, plan for it, and minimize it as best you possibly can. That's us, amazing, stunning. That's about as attractive as we're ever going to look between us, as you can tell by looking at us in real life after that. I don't know if any of you were over at the last, one of the very recent sessions, which had BritBox and AMC and so forth. They touched really well, I thought, on some of the issues that we're going to get into here. I'm probably going to refer to some of the things that were talked about there. Let's get into this. All right, basic premise. A few things to sort of set all of this up. I guess it's kind of the executive summary. All right. Tentpole content, if you can afford to have good tentpole content, fantastic, because we know that that can be leveraged successfully to drive both new subscribers, resubscriptions, which are really important to consider here. You cannot talk about subscription acquisition, you cannot talk about retention unless you fully understand resubscriptions on your platform. And by the way, on our data, and we'll talk about this in a moment, we've seen an increasing uptick in the amount of resubscription in the marketplace, which makes an awful lot of sense because the number of net new subscribers coming into the market has obviously contracted very much over the last 2 to 3 years. We're now no longer in an organic growth market, we're in a share-based market. It's all about stealing share from others and holding on to people for as long as you can and optimizing the yield that you get out of your subscribers. We're actually into the world of yield management these days. Think of it like an airline. You've got a certain number of seats. How much revenue can you generate out of those seats? You have a certain number of subscribers. How long can you hold on to them for? How much engagement can you drive? How much revenue, how much value can you drive from them? That is the world we're in right now. The other point about these campaigns, obviously, they're about getting existing subs leaning into the content more, perhaps discovering new content, finding more reasons to use the service, and drive what we call service centrality. So we'll talk about that again a little bit, but the more central a service is in somebody's entertainment life, within the household, inevitably, the more secure your hold is on that particular subscription. Now, as we said, the unintended consequence of successful tentpole campaigns, acquisition campaigns, is subsequent increased churn. At one level, that's kind of counterintuitive. You think, well, wait a minute, I'm bringing in loads of subscribers for this big sporting event or this blockbuster movie or whatever. That's what it's all about. It's about acquisition. Absolutely true. But when you look at it, when you bring in, let's say you bring in just around 1 million people for a particular piece of content, it's not a new series or whatever it is, they're coming for that. An inevitable percentage of that group is going to then go once they've seen it, unless you give them very, very good reasons to stick around. Now, some are going to stick around for longer, they're going to explore maybe, and how long they stick around for is dependent on the individual or on the household. And that is mostly driven by an attitudinal factor. We'll talk about that. So, what we found when looking at what the predictors of churn are, not just things that correlate, a tentpole campaign is actually a predictor of churn. It's not just something that sort of happens sometimes. It's one of the things that predicts churn, along with a handful of other key things, like, as I mentioned before, the attitudinal profile of the people subscribing, their basic underlying proclivity to churn. As we know, some people are set and forget it. They represent stability, others quite the opposite. It's just habitual to how they engage with media, that they come in, they come out, they're curating their own experience. We'll talk about that. So, our premise is that tentpole-related acquisition campaigns absolutely need to incorporate very well thought out retention plans before they're even launched. You need a 30-day, a 60-day, a 90-day plan. And we'll talk about that. If you haven't got that, you're not only exposing yourself to churn, I mean, I would argue, if I was being stroppy about it and I'd had a few beers, I'd say that's actually negligent. Because it's just a fact of how this thing works. And, you know, this is not entirely unknown to you. So, develop that 90-day strategy, but within it, carve it up. It needs to be based not just on content preferences, and that's about what they want to see, not what you want to promote at the particular time. Understanding what the actual content preferences are of people who are coming in for the type of content that you are using as your tentpole is absolutely critical, but also their propensity to churn. Not everybody, as I said, is inclined to churn. Others are hyper inclined to churn. That's a pun in the offing, actually. We've never done it before. So, one other point I want to make here is that we tend to oversimplify the success metrics. We're kind of putting a noose around our own necks because we are defining success too much in terms of simple subscriber headcount. It's too simplistic a model. To the point about some people being more likely to churn than others, if I bring in that million that I mentioned earlier for a particular tentpole, that is a very poor predictor of value for the business on an ongoing basis. Why? Because 50% of that million, which would often be the case for smaller services, might be people who are very likely to churn. So what does that tell me about the business 3 months out? How much yield am I going to get in the coming months out of that million if half of them are really likely to churn, but half of them are likely to stay? Whatever that percentage is determines future value. But we don't understand that if all we do is to say we've got 1 million new subscribers. The reason we do that is because companies don't want to talk about churn, and they tend not to. Good example of how that can work against you. Peacock did a fantastic job last year when they had that NFL playoff. They pulled in God knows how many people. Really successful, great example of the power of sport, even just one event, to pull in avid audiences. That was great for Q1 because they were able to report that. Q2, everybody was talking about uptick in churn. Shouldn't have been the issue. The issue should have been how many incremental subscribed months did we get from having that event on the platform? And that's about yield management. That's about all those people that come in, how long can you keep them for? We're going to get into that in some detail. All right, now I've talked about people of different proclivity to churn. Just some of you may have seen this before, most of you probably not. We did a big body of work back in 22, looking at the population. The goal was let's understand the whole population in terms of streaming behaviors and attitudes and what that means for the business. What can we learn from a body of work that we already had? We used to ask a question in a study that we ran every 6 months. That was, when you sign up for an SVOD service, typically how long do you intend to subscribe? And we consistently found that around about 40%, a couple of percentage points either way, would tell us some period of time less than 6 months. And some of those were those ones, I'm coming in for something, then I'm going to go. Others I'll browse around and stick around. But 6 months was a cut-off point for a lot. If you got them beyond 6 months, they tended to be there for a long time. But 40% is an awful lot of people. So we did this work to say, well, let's find out what the hell is going on there. Who are those people? Are they materially different? Is there a there? What can we learn? And how can we leverage it? Part of the outputs of this was this segmentation of the streaming population, which we apply across every service that we look at. And we track on an ongoing basis 33 different services at the moment, I think. And we look at fast services and we look at all sorts of things. From left to right, the low churn, as it says, staggering interpretation on my part of this chart, because you can see left churn on the lower churn on the right, high churn on the other side. The inerts, as we rather uncharitably call them, are basically out of the market. That group is very, very, very slowly decreasing. They're not available to everybody. If they come in, they're going to sign up for something on Netflix, Amazon, whatever it happens to be, Hulu, maybe Disney, because it has the brand. The other side, you've got the high churn. Now, this is really interesting. We talk about high churn subscribers. Well, we often talk about subscribers as one amorphous mass. They're our subscribers, and we just promote all our content to them. Not good promoting kids' content to me, who doesn't have any kids in the home, but I still get the emails. But there are two high churn groups. One of those you need and want. The other one, not so much, unless you're a very particular case. The hypers there, the green bunch, they're high churn, high value. Next to them, the digitarians, high churn, low value. The digitarians are so cool because they mostly live out of the realm of television. It's not as central to them as it is to a lot of other people. They're on TikTok, they're on YouTube, et cetera, et cetera. They come into TV, but statistically, they are way more likely to be on a free trial. They're way more likely to be using a password of somebody else's, and they dip in and out a lot. By the way, if you have UFC, MMA, they like that. They over-index massively for engagement with that kind of content. That's their content preference. Some of them, actually go to the events and so forth, but they're big into UFC and MMA. So that's where you would want to target them. Otherwise, not so much. But the high churn group, the hypers, the reason they're valuable, not only do they spend more on media and entertainment content than most people, not only do they tend to have more services, they're also a great advertising target, but they talk to more people about more content than any other group. They're your hit makers. They're your organic marketers. Growth is very hard to achieve if these people ignore you. And they do ignore some services because they never find anything there. They don't bother going back. That's a challenge. Up there, you've got mainstreamers and loyalists. They represent stability. The loyalists watch a lot of content. They talk about, you recognize them, they're classic TV lovers. They have quite a few services. They don't tend to churn out. They set it, they forget it, they use it, they like it. Mainstreamers, kind of the same, but they don't have as many services. They'll have 2, 3 services tops. And they live a lot in linear. All right. The other point about this is, notice the percentages up there. That's their percentage within the population as a whole. Leads us on to the next chart. Coming back to that question about how long do you typically expend, this is also predictive. Look at I want to highlight the hypers over here, obviously, because this is the one we just to make the point. They represent 12% of the population, as I said. But if you ask this question about when are you going to unsubscribe, rather, 72% of hypers say they're going to be gone within 6 months. Now, this is an average across all services. You take out Netflix, that's going to look a lot worse. And we can look at this by segment, by service, to really understand which services are more or less indispensable to them. We actually measure indispensability for all services. Fun fact, Netflix inevitably is off the charts in terms of indispensability. We often put up a chart where there's an arrow pointing up to the top corner, and Netflix is somewhere out there. Because if you put Netflix on the chart, it's almost impossible to read everything else because it's all scrunched in the corner, except for Amazon and a couple of others. The fun fact about that chart, which I don't have, which is why I'm explaining it, is just behind Amazon, fractionally behind Amazon, which of course has the whole Prime shopping thing to keep it where it is. Down below that, on indispensability, BritBox and Crunchyroll. They're the poster children for the power of a strong, well-delivered niche service to an underserved audience. Really powerful area. That's where I'd invest, frankly, in streaming services right now. If you have a nice portfolio of those kinds of services, you could do quite well. All right, so that's what they say about how long they're going to stick around. It plays out in real life. We're constantly tracking every single month when people say, which services have you dropped in the last month? What have you signed up for in the last month? Again, look at hypers. 11% of the population. 31% of subscription ads, new account openings. Sorry, not new, account openings. A lot of these are resubscribes. 31% of account openings in a month, 21% of account drops. Disproportionately important. They represent a lot of money and a lot of movement in the landscape. Very different from somebody like the mainstreamers at the top. 28% of the population, 9% of account openings, 9% of drops. They way under index on volatility. This is what you need to understand if you're bringing in people for a big, heavy investment tentpole that you're putting a lot of marketing around. What's the split? And this is where you really do see, if you've got 1 million mainstreamers come in, that's a very, very different scenario for your next 6 months, next 12 months of business than if you have 1 million hypers coming in. That's why you need to understand it. It's why you need to understand how they relate to the content that makes up the tentpole and other content you have on your platform. Because that tells you what you need to be promoting aggressively to those people to get them exploring, get them sticking around and finding more reasons to use your service and get more incremental months out of them. We're constantly telling clients, develop a hyper strategy. If you need them and you want to try and get a couple of extra months out of them. We did an analysis ages ago when HBO Max was called HBO Max for the first time, so we call it HBO Max 2. We said if you've got 20% of your high churn subscribers to spend another 2 months of the year on the platform at retail, and by the way, hypers are more likely to pay direct to the streamer full price. But if you achieve that, for HBO Max at that time, that would have put $112 million to the bottom line. And it's much more achievable than trying to get them there for 12 months of the year. So let's talk about once you've got them. This represents a decay curve by segment. But in broad terms, at the top, those are the ones who are most likely to stick around for the longest period of time. At the bottom, those are the ones who are getting out of there as soon as they can. The hypers. We've got average tenure in days. I'm sorry, it's small digits up there. But what you see is very, very sharp drop-off. The steepest drop-off for any of those folks, even if they are not that likely to go, is basically it's the first 90 days. This is why I say you need a 90-day strategy. You need a 30-day strategy, you need a 60-day, and you need a 90-day. As you say, this has to be based upon an understanding of who's who, so that you can target them. And it means differentiated marketing. You're going to be promoting different types of content, and also maybe different inducements. If you wanted somebody to come back a month earlier or stick around for a month longer, why are they going to do that? Maybe that's a pricing thing. Maybe that's something else that you package in that they can actually get access to. But get creative about how you're going to market to different people. It might relate to the subject of the tentpole. If it's a sports thing, okay, what can we do around sport to give these people a reason to stick around longer? If you stick around longer, you get this, whatever it happens to be. This, by the way, is matched against credit card data. This is not just what people tell us. This was this whole issue of how long you plan to be around, matched against credit card data over time. So, this is actually proper data modeling. You'll have your own version of this in your own first-party data, perhaps. But I do want to say, your first-party data won't tell you who's who. What they watch will overlap. Loyalists, stability, and hypers, volatility, watch a lot of the same content, but they have a totally different churn profile. The key driver is this attitude, their propensity to churn, and first-party data is never going to tell you that. You need to tie that into other things. And you also need to work out what else they're watching on other platforms. We'll talk about that in a moment on the basis of the data we've integrated into the Prism data set. Bit of an indication here, understanding different preferences around this kind of thing. This is very high level, it's just looking at genre and types of content. Again, hypers are kind of interesting. Note where sports is as the third level of interest. Comedy and drama obviously dominates for absolutely everybody, almost. Interestingly, inertia news is up on the top. They're old, they use a lot of local news and so forth. But sports is very high for the hypers. They over-index on a lot of sports. Go into that in a moment. But understanding where they are by type of content and then drilling into this. With our emotional DNA product, which we've had in market for about 12 years now, we look at how people engage with and how they perceive content at an emotional level. You know, when they say, I feel like watching X, what is it feels like? Oh, this is very relatable content, or it's outrageous content, or whatever it happens to be. And we're able to analyze individual shows, franchises, genres, subgenres, and so forth. And a lot of our clients use this when they're developing content strategy and so forth, marketing, ad sales, ad buying, and all the rest. We've integrated all of that data into Claritas' Prism data product, which Ron will talk about in a moment. But basically, every single household in the country is in there. So we're able to identify which households are more likely to be high churn, low churn, which households are more likely to be generating buzz around your content, and what kind of content they most primarily lean into and how they perceive it. And how they perceive it informs the messaging. So this is basically the root of how you're able to have an effective and differentiated marketing campaign to minimize churn once you've got those people and to try and flatten those decay curves as much as you can. Recognizing you'll never make them flat, you need to live with churn. This is about optimizing the propensity to churn, which is not something we usually talk about. It's not a word we associate with churn, but we should. All right, an example, I'm going to hand over to Ron in a second. Example, thinking of one particular type of content, F1. And this is a kind of trying to do double duty here, trying to make the point that sport is immensely valuable for streamers, not just for all the reasons that we talk about. You can generate ad sales and get engagement and all the rest of it. But if you've got high churn subscribers who are fans of something like F1 with a nice long season, with at least one race every month, they're not going to churn. Because if I bail out for a month or two, I'm missing races of something that I care about. Hypers significantly over-index within the F1 fan base. So F1 is something, whether you only get one or you get the entire season, that is a really cool thing to actually have if you want to try and get extra months out of those very, very volatile groups. Now, interesting, this relates to one particular service. It's not Netflix or Amazon, but it is one of the big 8. Let's call it Go Now plus Flix Max. And it's not HBO Max. But what's interesting, when you start to look at the level of interest in certain types of content by service, you start to see some variation. For this particular service, you're looking at a 2x level of interest or fandom, effectively, in F1. So the existing subscriber base is already into F1 for this particular service. That's good for driving engagement and so forth. What's more interesting is when you look at people who are intending to sign up to this service, and again, this is something we ask about every month, which services are you interested or you're planning to sign up to in the next X months, 2 months, 3 months, 6 months. The people who are intending to sign up to this service are 4 times more likely than the general population to be F1 fans. So this is the sort of data that informs what kind of content you're going to lean into to get people in and to keep them there. So then you start to say, what kind of content are F1 fans interested in within sport and beyond sport? Well, unsurprisingly, IndyCar ranks up there very highly. So does soccer, by the way. But then so does stuff like Yellowstone, 1883, the whole franchise there. They over-index over there. They're also very newsy. Interestingly, not left or right, but pretty much all news. When you start to think about where am I going to reach these people, what kind of messaging am I going to put out there in relation to which content, you can start to see that in their overall content consumption profile and see what within our portfolio have we got that resonates. Because you can look at what they watch across the landscape. Ron, I'm going to shut up and hang it over. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. So the key is that Prism is tied to all the research that Magid has done so that we're able to profile people who view by program, by station, by genre, by emotional content. Prism is also kind of universally used. Some of you may be familiar with it. Claritas has been building and updating Prism for over 50 years. It's on all the syndicated market research that's out there. Scarborough, it's on MRI, it's on the Nielsen TV ratings data. It's on all the primary research that Claritas does. We also do a lot of demographic research so that we can translate the profiles of F1 fans, for example, and tell you about their demographics. They're actually quite upscale. They're more than 50% above the average income. They tend to be upscale suburban households. We can talk about their lifestyles, their psychographics, their shopping behavior, their activities. These are just a few of the literally thousands of things that we track by Prism segment, either independently or in partnership with companies like Magid and the other ones I've named. So we can give a very detailed, robust profile of viewers of a particular program, format, genre, in this case F1, Formula One racing. These 8 segments that you see at the top there over-index significantly for being F1 fans, viewing F1. Some of them more than double the national rate, the penetration rate. Surprisingly, there's some, but not much overlap with NASCAR. The NASCAR crew, that audience base looks very different than the F1 base. And we can give you very detailed, very robust insights into who these audiences are on the basis of all that research. It's also tied to the ground. Every household has a Prism code. So we can combine the Prism codes that make up your target audience and show you where they are and where they aren't. By, in this case, DMA, by state, by zip, by neighborhood, by block, by household. Interestingly, Denver is the 4th most highly concentrated market for F1. Maybe that's not so surprise to you. To me, it was a big surprise. Some of the other ones were a big surprise. You don't think of Washington, D.C., and Salt Lake City, and Boston, and Seattle as places where you might find a lot of F1 fans, but
Well, think about that. I find it interesting. Austin, perhaps unsurprisingly, at the top because they've hosted a Grand Prix for a number of years now. And then you say, okay, well, what's the catchment area for the people that are going to be most impacted by having a Grand Prix in that area? People will travel a long way, but you can actually target on that basis, particularly around an F1 event.
Yep.
And you say, fine. And even leading up to an F1 event, we want to do a blitz on this group to hit F1 fans, if F1 is what you're looking at. But for F1, supplement anything else. It could be a certain type of content, different sports, or whatever it happens, or a movie franchise. We could do exactly the same for like Mission Impossible fans, or whatever it happens to be.
yes, and at any level. So Prism is on all the research. Prism is on the map. Prism is on all the household lists that are out there. We're partnered with Axiom and Epsilon and TransUnion and Equifax and all the people who have the detailed household list. Prism is on that as well. We also have an identity graph. What does that mean? It means we take one of those household lists and we start matching it up with all the digital identifiers, email addresses, IP addresses, device IDs, other digital identifiers that are out there, so that we're able to append these codes to your subscriber files, even if you don't have name and address. And a lot of you don't. Maybe you only have IP, maybe you only have email. How are you going to get these codes? Not just the Prism codes, but the Subscape codes, and linked to all the eDNA content, and go right onto your subscriber file. If you're worried about churn, well, who should you be worried about? You don't worry about the mainstreamers and the loyalists. You worry about the hypers and the vegetarians. We can put those codes on. We can also build audiences for acquisition campaigns. So you can target who you're going to acquire based on their propensity to be F1 fans, but also maybe their propensity to churn. And these segments are out there in the digital ecosystem. They're everywhere. You go to LiveRamp or, Trade Desk or wherever you buy your audiences. Prism is syndicated out there. We've also syndicated the Subscape segments. We can build custom audiences.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about this, going back to one of the points I made at the beginning about how we're basically in the same world as consumer goods, the telecom market, and this is the sort of approach that those folks take to secure as many customers as they can and extract as much value as customers as they can. It's not something that historically has been very typical in the media business. And I think the nature of the market that we're in now is going to demand that we have to start working more in this type of way. It doesn't mean we shed all the other stuff that we know already works, but this, I think, is going to become more central to how we identify, communicate with, and retain customers and extract the most value.
And acquire them, right? Like you said, you have to have not just a 30, 60, 90-day plan, but before that tentpole event, right? Who do we want to acquire? Who are we likely to acquire? But among the people we're likely to acquire, who would we prefer? Now, you can see the impressions here scrolling across the screen. We are also able to measure the success of an acquisition campaign and optimize the success of a campaign by segment. So since we have an identity graph, we can tell in the nanoseconds before an impression is served a lot of things about the person who's going to see that impression, what market they're in, what the weather is like there, what prism segment they are, what subscape segment they are. And based on machine learning, it's not really AI, it's machine learning, determine which version of the impression to serve to them, which creative, which text, which call to action, which audio overlay, which voice type. All those things, dozens and dozens of things get sensed in the instance before the impression is served and optimized based on machine learning. There's a tag on the ad server. There's a tag wherever the conversion event occurs. They talk to each other and they say, this person is more likely to convert based on this creative. And that's based on millions and millions of impressions. And the longer you're running the campaign, the longer you're optimizing, the more lift you're generating. We hold out 20% of the impressions to get random creative. And you can see in a dashboard in real time who's converting, who's not converting, who's responding to which creative, in which channel, and how much lift that's generating. It pays for itself. It's very cool stuff.
This kind of stuff blows my mind. This is creative optimization on steroids and speed at the same time, because it's using so many data points. These guys have 10,000 or more data points on many, many households in the country, loads. And when you use all of that in those nanoseconds with machine learning to say, oh, you look like that, this is the version for you, whereas you look like that, this is the version for you. It's, I mean, I haven't got to play with this yet, but I mean, God, there's a lot of fun to be had with this shit. Sorry, stuff.
This is one of the screens from the real-time dashboard. It shows you the profile of people converting. These are, each bar represents a Prism segment. This happens to be F1 fans. You can see segment 2 index is very high. That was the, and you can have a conversation with that segment virtually. If you came by our booth, maybe you saw we have a prototype device there that has a hologram of a person who represents a segment, and you can ask them about their streaming behavior, about their preferences, about their shopping behavior, about what cars they drive, about whatever you want. We're not supposed to talk about ad sales, but it's great data to inform ad sales, right? Mm-hmm. If you're interested in that. And you can learn about why they're subscribing, how long they're intending to subscribe. You can ask whatever question you want. We actually have a feature here where you can select the top 5 segments if you want, ask the same question, it's like a virtual focus group, and get the answer from each one in persona, in character, based on all the data we've collected and the data that Magid has collected, and get pretty good answers that give you deep insights into your potential audience, your subscribers, your potential subscribers. If you haven't already come by the booth and talked to the prototype box, well, there's still time, but that's just an example of what we're doing. So we have about 2 minutes left. We'd like to solicit questions. Jenna here has some lovely gifts.
We are so keen to solicit questions that Jenna will actually give you an Amazon gift card if you ask a question related to the content, not the weather. If there is anything, let us know. I can barely see half of you because I'm being blinded. Any questions? Hands up in the air. No questions? Oh, yes, sir.
I'll do a question. You mentioned the loyalty of Netflix, Prime, BritBox, Crunchyroll. Is that your data? Is it available somewhere?
It is. Well, it's our data. Some of it's out in the public domain. Talk to me afterwards. But yeah, unsurprisingly, Netflix is just way out there, which is why they like our data for their ad sales narratives. There we go. Anybody else for anything else? Yes, down the back, sir. Gentleman with the beard.
Hi there. Thank you. Super interesting.
Thank you.
Can I ask, a lot of it seemed very focused on going after the hypers, which had a higher propensity to churn. Isn't that there's more value? Why do you say there's more value there as opposed to targeting folks that once you get them would likely be stickier? Anyway, what's the value you see in going after those high churners?
Got it. I emphasize the hypers simply because we're orienting around the notion of retaining the people you get. And it also comes down to how you define value. And there's obviously more than one way of doing that. Yeah, the mainstreamers, the loyalists, and the pragmatics in the middle, all of them, frankly, yes, they all represent value in terms of how long they can be on the channel, on the platform, what they're going to pay, and so forth. Absolutely, they're all very valuable. The way in which hypers are differently valuable is related to the fact that they drive growth. Hypers are more likely than any other part of the population to be the one that tells you, hey, I just saw this show called Stranger Things. It's on Netflix. Go see Stranger Things. It's fantastic, and they'll tell you why.
They're influencers.
Yeah, they are your organic marketers, the word of mouth. I'll tell you, there was one, I won't mention the service, but when we started doing this work, one of the larger services looked like it had way less churn than the others, and its peers, and it did. We thought, wow, they're doing really well. They're doing something special because they're markedly lower. We dived into the data, and we said, oh, actually, that's not good. The reason they had much lower churn was because they were not attracting hypers anymore. They would have done originally, but what's happened is they came along and they said, well, there's nothing I want to watch. There's continually nothing I'm interested in. So I don't bother going back there anymore. So you don't get that sense of cultural relevance that's driven by that group more than any other. The churn they did have was the worst kind of churn. I'm glad you asked this question, because those mainstreamers and loyalists, those typically stable subscribers, set it and forgetters, if they churn out, it's because they really don't intend to come back. It's because this is just not good value for money, there's never any content, it's a crappy interface, nobody in the household watches anything on it. They're really hard to get back. They cost a lot of money to get back. The hypers, when they go, they're not really leaving. More often than not, they're just going away for a bit. They've worked out that it's very easy to switch it off and switch it back on again. And they go, Disney Plus, Mandalorian's done, I've seen Animal, nothing here. It'll be back, and I'll be back. And it's not a money thing with that group, actually, interestingly. They skew affluent. They spend more money on media and entertainment than anybody else. They just don't see the point in spending money on something they do not expect to use when it's so easy to stop paying and use that money somewhere else. So that's why that group are uniquely valuable, or more valuable than anybody else. The loyalists, who are also the stable subscribers, they talk to other people about content too, but it's more about family. They don't have such a broad reach into the population. So as growth drivers, they don't have as much value in that respect, although there are more of them, so you can trade it off. That's why hypers are particularly interesting. It's why, frankly, you do need a different strategy for those folks, because you're going to be trying to get them to stick around for a bit longer or come back a bit sooner, and you're going to, like I say, optimize their propensity to churn rather than pretend it doesn't exist and say, yeah, we want you for 12 months. Because unless you're one of very, very few number of services, that's not on the agenda. Which is the other thing, you need to understand the indispensability or otherwise the churnability of a specific service in the eyes of different types of subscribers. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thanks, Mike.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, we're gonna have to wrap up. We're a little over time.
We are.
But that was a wonderful, wonderful presentation. Thank you guys so much.